Hi everyone, this is my review on Cinder by Marissa Meyer, whatnot. And this is like my 155 millionth attempt at filming this review. I keep getting interrupted, so let's hope, fingers crossed, that this one goes through. So yes, this is the futuristic sci-fi retelling of Cinderella, and as you know, I love my fairy tale retellings. For the most part, I'd heard some really positive reviews on this book. A lot of people loved it or just enjoyed it a great deal. I'd heard some mixed and negative reviews, but I mean, that's going to be the case if you delve deeply enough into the myriad of reviews that are on any book. But I had a really good time with it. I really appreciated it. It's not as dark as some of the fairy tale retellings that I pick up, but I enjoy my more slightly lighter retellings as well. Not that it wasn't fluff. I'll link some other reviews of this book in the doobly-doo in my pants. I didn't find it fluffy at all. I bet it's just very enjoyable and especially quite refreshing. I like the fact that it was equally as much a sci-fi narrative as it was a Cinderella story, and the fact that I think those two elements complemented each other very nicely, and there was an equal measure of both things in there, and I felt it worked really well to create its own feel and its own tale. So it was able to step out of the shadow of just being the Cinderella story and become its own thing in its own right, which was really good. And yeah, I very much appreciated that. And Cinder as a protagonist, I really liked her very much. And yes, so this is set in the future, and this is following World War IV, because, you know, human beings are assholes, so we have a World War IV, which makes things extra awful, and results in a number of countries amalgamating together and things, so new commonwealths and new continents are kind of formed, and we have the Eastern Commonwealth, of which one of the major cities is New Beijing, and that is the setting for the goings-on of Cinder. And Cinder is, of course, a cyborg mechanic. How cool is that? I think that it might, when you say that term, people probably think maybe she's a little more overtly badass than she is. She's very badass in her own right, but she's not she's not like a fighter as much as I think the term cyborg mechanic would probably paint in your head. But it's very much a good drawing card and selling point for a lot of people. I like that the fact that she's a mechanic. It really is just her profession. It's what she's good at, and so it's just what she does. I'd very much like to know how it was she became a mechanic and how she found that was her skill set, because that's never touched upon, and I was just curious as to, well, how did you become a mechanic, Cinder? Because it's just like a strange kind of profession for her to suddenly have found. Her being a cyborg, however, is a major plot point of the story, and it's a major element in her personal growth and her accepting herself and things, because being a cyborg, having, she's got metallic limbs, she has a metallic hand and foot, I believe, and a lot of prosthetics and whatnot throughout her body, and even though that isn't uncommon, there are other cyborgs in New Beijing and in the world. It's still looked upon with a great deal of prejudice, and it's a new form of racism that has emerged in this future society. So it makes Cinder very uncomfortable and awkward and ill at ease around people and stuff. So her being a cyborg is a big deal and a big part of the narrative. We have a lot of the traditional Cinderella elements in here. She has a stepmother who is a bitch. At first I thought that she just wasn't a very nice, decent person, and I could understand a little bit of where she was coming from, even though I did not like her, but at the end I certainly thought her stepmom was a right cow. One of her stepsisters is also not a very nice person either. Again, I can sort of understand why she's bitter and horrible, but she's still not someone you'd want to know. But rather like Ever After, what I like is that one of the stepsisters is actually decent and quite sweet, and is a friend to Cinder. She's her only human friend, and yeah, they have a nice little bond, which is really lovely. Cinder's other only friend is Aiko, who is the family's servant android, and she's adorable. I love Aiko. She has like a faulty personality chip, rather like if you've seen Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams. Faulty personality chips mean that the robots and androids actually have more of a personality and they've developed their own thing going on, so it's very much just like having a human friend, really. And so they're much more animated and much more personable than they're meant to be. And Aiko's really lovely. So, yeah, that's the dealio, and Cinder works as a mechanic, and her stepmom hates her. Her dad, it's not her dad, sorry, her adoptive father, because I should say she's adopted, so there's no actual blood connection between any of these people and herself, which adds to the bitterness, I think, that the stepmom feels towards her. Her adopted father has passed away, so that's kind of left her without any, like, sympathetic governing body, so even though she's now considered like the property of her stepmother, especially because she's a cyborg, so she's got a lower social status kind of thing, and so that lessens her value. So things at home aren't nice. She works as a mechanic at the market, and that's where she meets Prince Kai, who is the Prince Charming of the story, of course. And Prince Kai is in a bit of a pickle because there's a plague going all around the world, and it's getting especially bad in New Beijing, and it started about, was it 14 years ago? Something like that. And no one knows exactly how it came about, but it's spreading like crazy. They don't know quite how it's contracted from one person to another, and there is no cure or antidote as yet, and they keep doing research, and they use cyborgs as their research guinea pigs a lot of the time, and these cyborgs die, giving their bodies up for science to find a cure and stuff. So it's not a nice situation, and a lot of people are dying. So that's including the Emperor, who's Kai's dad. So Kai's not in a very happy situation, and he meets Cinder, and then stuff happens. And you've got a lot of, like I said, there's some of the traditional elements in there. There is a ball that's kind of the culmination of like where the climax and stuff happens in the story. It's not a big deal. It's certainly not a big deal to Cinder, which I like. And anytime someone's like, a ball, she's like, yeah, I've got other things to worry about. I want to escape this place. There's also more subtle, slightly quieter little references to Cinderella, like Cinder's goal is to fix up this old abandoned car, like, you know, a car that we have that she found in an old junkyard, because no one drives cars anymore. And she found it, and it's going to be her escape, her means of escaping this life. And it's a, like, beat up orange car that Aiko thinks looks like a rotting pumpkin, so that's a cute little wink there, which I liked. And the sci-fi elements I thought were good. I mean, maybe they could have been more detailed and, I don't know, more dense perhaps, but for what they were, I enjoyed them and I could follow them. And I think that they certainly helped to bring the story out of its fairy tale trappings and into its own thing. Cinder I very much liked as a protagonist. I can't exactly like pinpoint why, really, but her narrative voice was really strong to me. I liked that she could be snarky and sarcastic with people, but it didn't leave her feeling like cold and remote as a narrator or anything, and it added a bit of flavour to her interactions with people, particularly Prince Kai. She's very matter-of-fact and sort of blunt with him as well, which is cool, and she's often like kind of like dissing the things he says and offers to her, and because Prince Kai has a habit of just never doing royal stuff, he's always out and about doing other things, it seems. So Cinder's often like, why are you here? Why aren't you at the palace, dude? I'm working. So I really like that. She kind of puts him in his place in her own way at times. Often it's a defense mechanism and she doesn't really mean it, but I still find it fun. That leads me to the relationship between Cinder and Kai. Was something I really enjoyed because it is portrayed as a crush, like this mutual crush they have for one another, and it's nothing more or less than that. It isn't portrayed as being this epic love of a lifetime, at least not yet, which I really appreciate, because they've only known each other for like a week or so, and they're not in love, they just have a crush, and that's all it is, and that's all it has to be. So I really, really was so thankful for that. Honestly, especially because I put several books down that I've been reading because of the insta-love that's been happening in them, and it pisses me off to no end, as many of you know. So the fact that it is treated just as they have a crush on one another, and that's quite cute, that made me so happy. So their relationship progresses in a really nice way. It's quite credible, the pacing of it is good, and they actually have conversations together, people. This is how you fall in love. Conversation. So, yeah, that's good. Prince Kai, I've seen some criticism on Goodreads of his character because people consider him to be sort of weak and spineless. And the thing is, what annoys me about that criticism, while it has some weight to it, and I can understand why people think that, I wonder if they would criticize Kai if he were female. if the fact that he seems weak and spineless is simply because he's the male and he's the romantic lead, and as such he's the Prince Charming role, so you'd expect that he's going to be all heroic and bombastic and coming in saving the day and doing lots of heroic deeds and such, and he doesn't really do that. I found it to be much more realistic in a way because he's young and he's in a really tricky situation and he doesn't know what to do, and he admits that. He has some chapters where it's kind of from his point of view, and he admits that he has no idea what he's doing. He's just trying to do the right thing, but he's really tired and he doesn't want any of this responsibility and stuff. And while it's not necessarily admirable, it's certainly understandable, so I didn't really have a problem with that. At times he was a little bit, not arrogant necessarily, but just a bit selfish and whiny, but again, it made him seem more realistic because he is a teenager. I assume his age is never touched upon, I don't think, but it just reminds you that he's young and he's in a really bad position for his age, and it's a tricky situation, so that didn't really bother me too much. But Cinder I really loved as a character. Supporting characters I really loved Aiko, of course, and the nice sister Peony, she was really sweet. There's a character called Dr. What's-His-Face, I've forgotten his name, and he's interesting because he's kind of the morally grey character. You don't quite know where he sits for a lot of the time, but I'm really interested in him and what his role is going to be in Cinder's future, because their interactions were really fun for me to read too. They play off each other in a really cool way, I think. And personality-wise, I just found him interesting. People have criticised the predictability of the book, but I think, as is the case often with a fairy tale retelling especially, even though this one's just taking the bones of the structure and building up from that, you know certain things obviously you're going to get, and you know what the end game of it is going to be ultimately because you know the fairy tale, and it's probably going to stick at least loosely to that. I know that the major reveal, the major climax of this installment was really evident from page 50, sort of around there, from early on in the book you kind of knew what the big secret was going to be, so it didn't become a matter of what is going to be revealed, but rather when and how that made it interesting. So it didn't bother me too much because I was more so curious, how will they tell Cinder, how will she react? That was what I was interested in, because you knew what was going to be told and you could kind of work out what a lot of the secrets were, but it was just a matter of the pacing of it and how characters would react in regards to that, so that made it more interesting. It didn't really bother me that it was obvious, and I'm still curious enough certainly to see where it goes in the future. Villain-wise, I think the villains were a little bit stereotypical. They're like the lunar people who live on the moon, who've colonised on the moon and have become less or more than human and aren't very nice, and there's this evil queen and she wants to rule all and start a war and stuff. She was a bit stereotypical, but I think that still fits into the fairy tale theme of it all because, you know, you always have to have a big bad in the world, fairy tale world. I'm interested though to see what, learn more about the lunar people in the future, because there was a lot of racism and prejudice, especially towards them, even though they're meant to be the quote-unquote villains of the piece. So I want to see that explored, because it's only one character who brings up the fact that, hey, you know, not all lunar people are bad. It's kind of like prejudice against the Slytherins. Not all Slytherins are bad, even if everyone who's bad was in Slytherin. You know, it doesn't work both ways. So I'd like to see what happens with the Lunars in the future. This is the first in the Lunar Chronicles, so we've got 3 other books coming, which is Scarlet, Cress, and Winter. Scarlet I know is Red Riding Hood, which I'm really keen to see what that's going to be like. Red Riding Hood's one of my favourite fairy tales. And then Cress, I'm not sure. I'm pondering what Cress could be. Maybe it's Sleeping Beauty, perhaps? Or Rapunzel, maybe. And Winter, I'm assuming Winter's either going to be the Snow Queen or Snow White. So, yeah, but I'm really keen to continue with the series. I really loved Luna I really loved Cinder as a protagonist. And, yeah, I just had fun with the book. So I'm going to give it a 4.5 stars out of 5 for Cinder by Marissa Meyer.